Emily Morgan stood in front of her latest photograph, a hauntingly beautiful black and white piece capturing the reflection of a woman's face fractured across broken mirror shards. The image would be the centerpiece of her first solo exhibition at the prestigious Hamilton Gallery, a milestone that had once seemed impossibly distant. As she adjusted the frame's alignment, her phone buzzed with a message from her husband, Zach. Running late again. Important client meeting. Don't wait up. The familiar words appeared on her screen like a well-worn script. Emily's fingers hovered over the keys, torn between sending another understanding response and finally voicing the growing unease that had been gnawing at her for weeks. 3 months ago, Zach would have been here, helping her prepare for the biggest moment of her career. Now, his absence felt like a shadow that grew longer with each passing day. The gallery's hardwood floors creaked beneath her feet as she moved to the next piece. The sound echoed through the empty space, amplifying her solitude. Through the lens of her camera, Emily had always found beauty in isolation, but lately, that solitude had begun to feel less artistic and more personal. The lighting here needs adjustment, a warm voice called from across the room. Mark Chen, her fellow photographer and studio partner, appeared with a stepladder and toolkit. His presence had become increasingly reliable as Zach's had diminished. You can't let shadows obscure your best work, Em. Emily managed a grateful smile, watching as Mark expertly adjusted the track lighting. He'd been more than just a colleague throughout the preparation for this exhibition, he'd become a confidant, someone who understood the language of light and shadow that she spoke through her art. Zach's missing another setup day? Mark asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. There was something in his expression, concern mixed with something else, that made Emily's stomach tighten. Client meeting, she replied, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. Clara's probably taking notes for him right now. The mention of Zach's new assistant made her voice waver slightly, though she tried to disguise it by busying herself with her camera settings. Mark descended from the ladder, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that reminded her of how she looked through her viewfinder, searching for truth in the details. You know, I've been meaning to tell you something about Zach and Clara. Last week, I saw them at Le Petit Bistro during lunch hour. It seemed intense. Emily's hands stilled on her camera. They were probably discussing work, she said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. She remembered how Zach had claimed to be in meetings all last week, too busy even for their traditional Friday lunch date. Maybe, Mark conceded, but his tone suggested otherwise. But Emily, I've worked in corporate before. Most business lunches don't involve holding hands under the table. The revelation hit her like a physical blow, but years of photography had taught Emily to steady her hands even when her world was shaking. She lifted her camera, focusing on a distant point through the lens. Through the viewfinder, the world became smaller, more manageable, reduced to light and composition rather than betrayal and doubt. The exhibition opens in 3 days, she said finally, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. I need to focus on that right now. But even as she spoke, her mind was already assembling pieces of a different composition, Zach's late nights, the mysterious business trips, the way he'd started password protecting his phone, and how he'd grown defensive whenever she mentioned Clara's name. Mark stepped closer, his presence solid and reassuring. You're right. The exhibition comes first. But Emily, whatever's going on, you deserve to know the truth. And speaking of truth. He hesitated, running a hand through his dark hair. There's something else you should know about Zach. Something I overheard at the Photography Association meeting last month. It's about your joint investment account. Before he could continue, the gallery's front door chimed. Emily turned to see Clara herself walking in, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors with precise, confident steps. She carried a portfolio case that Emily recognized as Zach's, and her red lipstick looked freshly applied. Oh! Clara's surprise seemed rehearsed, her perfectly manicured hand flying to her throat. I'm so sorry, I was just dropping off some documents for Zach to sign. He said he'd be here helping with the exhibition setup. The irony of the moment struck Emily like a flash of bright light, illuminating everything she'd been trying not to see. In her photography, she'd always prided herself on capturing the exact moment when truth revealed itself. Now, she was living in one of those moments, watching as the carefully composed image of her marriage began to crack like a damaged negative. "He's running late," Emily replied, her photographer's eye noting how Clara's expression flickered for just a fraction of a second, guilt, perhaps, or triumph. "But since you're here, Clara, maybe you could help me understand something about all these late meetings my husband's been having." The tension in the room crystallized, sharp as broken glass. Emily raised her camera, an instinctive gesture that had always helped her face difficult moments. Through the lens, she saw Clara's confident facade waver, just as Mark stepped forward, ready to support whatever came next. The stage was set, the lighting perfect, for a confrontation that would shatter more than just Emily's artistic vision. The gallery lights cast long shadows across Emily's photographs as she faced Clara, her camera still raised like a shield between them. Through the viewfinder, she watched emotions play across the younger woman's face, defiance, uncertainty, and something that might have been regret. The moment stretched between them, taut as a wire about to snap. "I'm not sure what you mean," Clara said finally, her manicured fingers tightening on Zach's portfolio. "The meetings are just business. Standard client consultations." But her voice wavered on the last word, a subtle fracture in her polished facade. Emily lowered her camera slowly, deliberately. In her years of photography, she'd learned that the most revealing moments often came after the shutter closed, in that space of vulnerability when people thought the lens had stopped watching. "It's interesting," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest, "how these client meetings never seemed to run this late before you joined the firm." Mark moved closer, his presence a steady anchor in the charged atmosphere. "Clara, I think it might be best if you left those documents with Emily. I'm sure Zach can review them at home." Clara's gaze darted between them, calculation replacing uncertainty. "Actually, these are confidential. Corporate policy." She took a step backward, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "I should go. I'll let Zach know you're looking for him, Emily." As Clara retreated, Emily felt something shift inside her, not the sharp pain of betrayal, but a deeper, more resolute emotion. She turned to Mark, who was watching her with concern evident in his dark eyes. "Tell me about the investment account." Mark guided her to a nearby bench, positioned beneath one of her most striking photographs, a series of wine glasses at various stages of shattering. "At the Photography Association meeting, I overheard Zach talking to someone about a new venture. He was discussing using personal investment funds as startup capital. Your name came up." Emily's mind raced to their joint account, the one they'd built together over years of careful saving. Her photography earnings, combined with Zach's salary, had created a comfortable cushion, one they'd promised to use for their shared dreams. "How much?" "From what I gathered, he's planning to move a significant portion. The venture involves Clara somehow, something about innovative financial consulting services." Mark hesitated, then added, "Emily, the way they were talking, this isn't a recent development. They've been planning this for months." The revelation settled over her like a heavy cloud, darkening everything she thought she knew about her marriage. Every late night, every missed dinner, every distracted conversation took on new meaning. She thought of her exhibition pieces, how many of them unknowingly captured the dissolution of her life through metaphor: shattered glass, empty chairs, solitary figures in vast spaces. Standing abruptly, Emily moved to her central piece, the woman's face in broken mirror shards. She saw now what had driven her to create it. Some part of her had known, had been trying to tell her through her art what her conscious mind refused to acknowledge. "I need to see our account records," she said, pulling out her phone. But when she tried to log into their joint banking app, an error message appeared: "Access denied, invalid credentials." "He's changed the passwords," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. The betrayal was no longer just emotional, it had become tangibly real, quantifiable in dollars and cents. Mark touched her shoulder gently. "Emily, I know someone, a financial investigator who specializes in cases like this. She can help you understand exactly what's happening with your money." Emily nodded slowly, her photographer's mind already composing new images, not of broken things, but of sharp edges and steel resolve. "The exhibition opens tomorrow night," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Zach promised to be there, said he'd invite all his important clients." "He won't expect you to make a scene," Mark observed. "Not in front of everyone he's trying to impress." A small, bitter smile crossed Emily's face. "No, he won't. He still thinks I'm the same woman who's been quietly accepting his excuses for months." She turned to her shattered mirror piece, seeing it with new eyes. "But that woman is gone." Her phone buzzed again, another message from Zach, wrapped up with Clara. "Planning something special for your opening night. You'll be surprised." Emily's fingers moved swiftly across the screen, looking forward to it. For the first time in months, she wasn't lying. She would be ready for whatever tomorrow brought, but not in the way Zach expected. As she and Mark continued preparing the gallery, Emily's mind worked on 2 tracks, arranging her photographs with meticulous care while simultaneously cataloging every financial document she could remember, every conversation about money that had seemed odd, every time Zach had deflected questions about their future plans. The exhibition would open in less than 24 hours. In photography, timing was everything, knowing exactly when to press the shutter, when to capture the decisive moment. Tomorrow night would be her moment, but first, she needed to understand exactly what she was about to expose. Dawn crept through the gallery windows, painting strips of gold across Emily's photographs. She hadn't gone home last night, choosing instead to lose herself in the meticulous work of final preparations. Each photograph she hung told a story she was only now beginning to fully understand, not just about light and shadow, but about the gradual dimming of her own light over years of compromise. The financial investigator Mark recommended, Sandra Torres, had arrived early, her sharp eyes taking in both Emily and the exhibition space with professional assessment. "Your husband has been quite busy," she said, spreading documents across a temporary desk they'd set up in the gallery's back office. "The pattern is subtle, but clear. Small transfers at first, then larger ones disguised as business expenses." Emily studied the papers, seeing her marriage laid bare in columns of numbers and transaction dates. "When did it start?" "The first suspicious transfers began around the time Clara joined the firm," Sandra replied, highlighting a series of entries. "But the groundwork was laid earlier. Joint accounts gradually restructured, permissions modified. Like a photographer adjusting aperture settings, small changes that dramatically affect the final image." The analogy struck Emily deeply. How many times had she done exactly that in her work, made minute adjustments that transformed the entire composition? She'd been so focused on capturing others' stories through her lens that she'd missed the shifting narrative of her own life. Standing, Emily walked to her latest series, photographs she'd taken during the months when her marriage had begun to unravel. She saw now how her subconscious had been speaking through her art, empty chairs in conversation, bridges leading nowhere, hands reaching across impossible distances. Her work had been trying to tell her what her heart refused to acknowledge. "He's liquidated nearly 60% of your joint investments," Sandra continued from the office. "The money's been moved through several accounts, eventually funneling into a new corporate entity, Phoenix Financial Consulting. Registered 2 months ago, with both his and Clara's names on the documentation." The name hit Emily like a physical blow. Phoenix, the symbol of rebirth from ashes. Zach had always talked about wanting his own firm someday, but in all their discussions, it had been their shared dream, something they would build together. Now he was pursuing it with Clara, using the foundation they'd built as kindling for his new beginning. Mark arrived with coffee and a gentle concern that made Emily's throat tight with gratitude. "Sandra's found something else," he said quietly. About Clara's history with other firms. The financial investigator nodded, pulling up additional documents on her laptop. She's done this before. 3 times. Junior assistant positions at financial firms, relationships with married executives, followed by suspicious fund transfers and new business ventures. The ventures fail within a year, but by then, she's moved on. The marriages don't survive. Emily absorbed this information with an odd sense of calm. In photography, the truth of an image often emerged in the darkroom, details surfacing gradually in the developing solution. This truth was developing before her eyes, and while it hurt, it also brought clarity. "The exhibition opens in 12 hours, Emily said, her voice steady. Zach's invited all his potential clients, probably planning to use my success to impress them. He doesn't know we know." Mark touched one of her photographs, a series of water droplets caught at the moment of impact, each containing a world of distorted reflections. "What are you thinking?" Emily's response was interrupted by a text from Zach, "Can't wait for tonight. Clara's helped me arrange something special. Your moment will be unforgettable." The irony almost made her laugh. He was right about one thing: tonight would be unforgettable, but not in the way he planned. Emily looked at her photographs, seeing them with new purpose. Each image she'd created was a testament to her ability to see truth, to capture reality in its most revealing moments. Tonight, she would turn that skill toward illuminating a different kind of truth. "Sandra," she called to the investigator, "I need every document showing the money transfers, the new company registration, Clara's history, everything. But first, I need you to help me understand exactly how he's been moving the money. I want to know every detail, every legal implication." As Sandra began explaining the complex web of financial manipulations, Emily felt something shifting inside her. The hurt was still there, but it was being transformed, like light through a prism, into something else, not a desire for revenge, but a determination to reclaim her story. Her phone buzzed again. "Clara this time, just reviewed the final guest list. All the right people will be there. Everything's perfect." Emily let the message go unanswered as she turned back to her photographs. Perfect was a word she'd stopped believing in long ago. In her work, she'd learned that true beauty often lay in the imperfections, the unexpected moments of revelation. Tonight would be full of such moments. She caught her reflection in the gallery window, a woman she barely recognized, stronger than the one who had started hanging these photographs days ago. The light had changed, not just outside in the breaking dawn, but within her. Something was developing, like an image in a darkroom, its edges becoming sharper with each passing moment. The afternoon light filtered through the gallery windows, casting prism-like reflections across the polished floor. Emily stood before her mirror series, watching how the changing light transformed the fractured images. Each shard held a different perspective of the same truth, much like the pieces of her life she was now reassembling into a new whole. Sandra's voice carried from the back office, where she was conferring with a legal consultant. "The timing of these transfers, combined with the company registration, it's not just unethical, it's potentially fraudulent. He's been using your joint assets as collateral for loans without proper authorization." Emily absorbed this information with a calm that surprised her. The night before, she'd spent hours in her darkroom at home, developing a new series of photographs she'd taken over the past weeks. The images revealed something she hadn't consciously intended: each frame captured moments of transition, of boundaries between shadow and light. They told the story of her awakening, documented in silver and shadow. "The guest list for tonight is impressive," Mark said, reviewing the RSVP confirmations. 3 bank executives, several venture capitalists. Zach's been strategic about who he's invited. He paused, studying Emily's expression. "Are you certain about this? Going public could change everything, not just for him, but for you too." Emily traced her fingers along the edge of one of her frames, feeling the smooth precision of its borders. "I spent years defining myself through his lens, the supportive wife, the silent partner, the steady presence in the background. But that was never the whole picture. Her phone lit up with another message from Zach: "Just finished a great meeting with potential investors. They're excited about tonight. Your work is going to help launch something amazing." The presumption in his words, that her art could be reduced to a mere backdrop for his ambitions, crystallized something in Emily's mind. She thought about all the small compromises, the subtle ways he'd gradually reshaped her perspective until she could barely recognize her own reflection. "It's not about public exposure or revenge," she said, turning to Mark. "It's about truth. In photography, we don't just capture images, we reveal what's already there, waiting to be seen. Tonight isn't about destroying Zach's future. It's about reclaiming mine." Sandra emerged from the office, holding a freshly printed document. "The forensic accounting is complete. We've traced every transfer, every manipulation. But there's something else you should see." She laid out a series of papers showing Clara's previous ventures. Each time, she targeted firms on the verge of expansion. Each time, she positioned herself as essential to the transition. And each time, she walked away with significant control over the new ventures. Emily's artistic eye caught the pattern, like a photograph repeated with subtle variations, each instance revealing more about the photographer's intent. She's not just an accomplice, Emily realized. She's the architect. The gallery door chimed, and Clara walked in, her confidence evident in every step. She carried an elaborate floral arrangement, roses and lilies in a crystal vase. "A preview of tonight's decorations," she announced, her smile practiced and precise. "Zach wanted everything to be perfect for your big moment." Emily met her gaze steadily, seeing past the polished surface to the calculated intent beneath. In that moment, she recognized something she'd missed before: Clara's expertise wasn't in finance but in perception management, in creating images that obscured rather than revealed. "The flowers are beautiful," Emily replied, her voice carrying a warmth that made Clara's smile falter slightly. "They'll complement the theme perfectly, especially my new series about transformation." Clara's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "New series? I thought the exhibition pieces were already finalized." "Art, like life, is full of surprises," Emily said, moving to adjust one of her photographs, an image of a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis, captured in the moment between containment and flight. "Sometimes the most powerful statements are the ones we don't plan." After Clara left, Mark touched Emily's shoulder gently. "She suspects something." "Good," Emily replied, her resolve strengthening. "Let her wonder. Let her spend these last few hours trying to figure out what she missed, just like I spent months questioning what I was failing to see." The afternoon light was shifting now, creating new patterns across her photographs. Emily watched as the shadows lengthened, thinking about the nature of exposure, how a single moment of illumination could transform everything. Tonight, when the gallery filled with people, when Zach arrived expecting to use her success as a stepping stone, she would show him that she had learned to see in the dark. Her phone buzzed one final time, a message from Zach: "Just picked up my suit from the cleaners. Ready to stand by your side for your triumph." Emily smiled, a genuine expression that held no bitterness, only clarity. He had never understood that her art wasn't about triumph or success, it was about truth, about seeing what was real beneath the surface. Tonight, she would share that vision with everyone, including him. The hour before the exhibition opening stretched like a held breath. Emily stood in the center of the gallery, surrounded by her photographs, each one a milestone on her journey to this moment. The evening light painted long shadows across the walls, and in their shapes, she saw echoes of the woman she used to be, always reaching for connection, always adjusting herself to fit someone else's frame. Sandra had arranged the financial documents with the same precision Emily applied to her photography, each piece of evidence carefully positioned to tell its own story. "Remember," she said, reviewing their strategy one final time, "timing matters as much as content. Like in photography, it's about capturing the decisive moment. Emily nodded, running her fingers along the edge of her newest piece, a photograph she'd taken just yesterday. It showed a prism catching light, transforming a single beam into a spectrum of possibilities. The image wasn't about division or fracture, but about revelation and truth. "The first guests will arrive in 30 minutes, Mark said, checking his watch. Zach just texted, he's bringing the venture capital team early for a private viewing. His eyes met Emily's. "Are you ready?" The question echoed in the quiet gallery space. Emily thought about readiness, about all the moments that had led her here. She thought about the morning she'd first noticed Zach's passwords had changed, about nights spent questioning her own perceptions, about countless small betrayals she'd learned to navigate like shadows in her viewfinder. "I spent years getting ready without realizing it," she replied, adjusting the lighting on her central piece. "Every compromise, every moment of doubt, they were all preparing me to see clearly." The gallery door chimed, and Clara entered, wearing an elegant black dress that seemed chosen to fade into the background. Her surprise at finding Emily already present flickered across her face before she could mask it. "Oh. I thought I'd help set up the champagne before everyone arrives." "Of course," Emily said, watching Clara's reflection multiply across her mirror series. "Everything's been carefully arranged for tonight." Clara paused, something in Emily's tone making her study the photographer more closely. "Zach mentioned you've been quiet lately. He's worried about you, all the late nights in your darkroom, the new pieces you wouldn't show him." "Art is about transformation," Emily replied, moving to adjust a photograph that showed a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis. "Sometimes we need darkness to develop something true." The door chimed again, and Zach entered with 4 men in expensive suits, the venture capital team. He crossed the gallery with practiced confidence, but Emily saw the slight hesitation in his step when he noticed Sandra's presence. "Darling, you remember Sandra Torres?" Emily said, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet space. "She's been helping me understand some interesting patterns in our investment portfolio." Zach's smile flickered, a momentary break in his composure that Emily captured in her mind like a photograph. "Tonight's about your art, sweetheart. Business discussions can wait." "Art and business aren't so different," Emily replied, moving toward her new series. "They're both about seeing truth beneath surface appearances. About understanding patterns." One of the venture capitalists moved closer to examine a photograph. "Remarkable work," he said. "There's such clarity in these images, a sense of revelation." "Revelation is exactly the theme," Emily agreed, watching Clara shift uncomfortably near the champagne table. "In fact, I've prepared a special presentation about patterns and truth. Sandra, would you help me distribute those portfolios we discussed?" The color drained from Zach's face as Sandra began passing out carefully prepared folders. Emily watched him realize, in slow motion, that the woman he dismissed as too focused on art to notice his machinations had been developing something entirely unexpected in her darkroom. "Each folder contains documented evidence of unauthorized financial transfers," Sandra explained professionally. "Detailed records of how funds from joint accounts were systematically moved to establish Phoenix Financial Consulting without proper authorization or disclosure." The venture capitalists opened their folders, their expressions shifting from confusion to concern. Clara took an instinctive step toward the door, but Mark's quiet presence blocked her path. "This isn't what you think," Zach started, but Emily raised her hand, the gesture somehow both gentle and final. "The interesting thing about photography," she said, her voice steady, "is that once you understand light and shadow, you can see how images are constructed. How stories are built and dismantled. Tonight isn't about exposure or revenge, Zach. It's about truth, yours, mine, and the space between them." The gallery had grown crowded now, more guests arriving to witness a revelation none of them had expected. Emily moved through the space with quiet purpose, each step carrying her further from the woman she'd been, closer to the one she was becoming. The gallery hummed with whispered conversations as the venture capitalists reviewed the evidence in their folders. Emily watched the scene unfold through her photographer's eye, seeing how each person's reaction added another layer to the emerging truth. The carefully constructed facade of Zach and Clara's plans crumbled not with dramatic confrontation, but with the quiet weight of documented facts. These transfers, one investor said, his voice cutting through the tension, they're systematic. Deliberate. He turned to Zach, whose confident posture had given way to something more brittle. Were you planning to disclose any of this before we finalized our investment? Clara stepped forward, her practiced charm wavering under the harsh light of scrutiny. There are explanations for every transaction. Context that isn't immediately apparent. Like the context of your previous ventures. Sandra interjected smoothly, distributing additional documents. The pattern is quite revealing when viewed in its entirety. Emily moved through the space with quiet purpose, adjusting the lighting on her photographs. Each image took on new meaning now, not just artistic expressions, but waypoints on her journey toward clarity. The fractured mirrors, the emerging butterflies, the prisms splitting light into truth, they told a story of transformation that went beyond betrayal and redemption. Emily, Zach said, his voice low and urgent as he approached her. We can explain everything. This isn't what you think. All these years together, everything we've built. That's the interesting thing about photography, Emily interrupted gently. It teaches you to see what's actually there, not what you wish to see. She gestured to her latest series. These pieces aren't about broken trust or shattered dreams, Zach. They're about the moment of understanding, when we finally see ourselves clearly. The venture capitalists were already gathering their things, exchanging significant looks. Clara's carefully maintained composure had begun to crack, revealing the calculations behind her eyes as she watched potential investors withdraw. The foundation of their planned venture was dissolving, not through confrontation, but through simple exposure to light. You've destroyed everything, Clara accused, her voice sharp with frustration. Years of planning, all our work. No, Emily corrected her, the word carrying no anger, only certainty. I've simply revealed what was already there. The truth doesn't destroy, Clara. It illuminates. Mark approached with a fresh set of documents, banking records showing the most recent attempts to access their joint accounts. The banks have been notified, he said quietly. All transfers have been frozen pending investigation. Emily watched Zach absorb this information, seeing in his expression the same gradual awakening she'd experienced over the past months. Understanding dawned not in a sudden flash, but in the slow dissolution of shadows he'd thought would hide his actions forever. The gallery had grown quiet, the opening night crowd thinning as word spread. Emily moved to her central piece, the photograph of light fracturing through a prism. Looking at it now, she saw not division but possibility, not an ending but a spectrum of new beginnings. You know what fascinates me about light? She asked, addressing no one in particular, though her words carried in the hushed space. It's neither created nor destroyed. It simply reveals what's already present, waiting to be seen. Sandra approached with final paperwork, legal documents protecting Emily's interests and initiating formal investigations into the unauthorized transfers. But Emily's attention was on her photographs, seeing in them now not just artistic expression but milestones of her transformation. Later that night, after the last guests had gone and the evidence had been properly filed, Emily stood alone in her gallery. The space felt different now, cleaner somehow, as if truth had cleared the air like a fresh breeze. Mark had offered to stay, but she'd needed this moment of solitude to fully appreciate the shift in her world's axis. Her phone lit up with messages from the art community, praise for her work, invitations to showcase her pieces in other galleries, opportunities that had nothing to do with being anyone's wife or silent partner. She thought about the darkroom where she'd spent so many recent nights, not hiding from reality but developing a clearer picture of her own strength. Moving through the gallery, Emily began planning her next series. Not about betrayal or loss, but about the quiet power of revelation, the way truth, like light, finds its way through every crack and shadow. She thought about all the women like her, standing in galleries of their own making, learning to see themselves clearly for the first time. The night had brought not victory or revenge, but something far more valuable, clarity. In the end, it wasn't about exposing Zach's betrayal or Clara's manipulations. It was about developing the negative of her life into something true, about stepping out of the shadows of compromise into the full spectrum of her own light. As she locked the gallery door, Emily caught her reflection in the window, a woman who had learned to see herself through her own lens, no longer fractured but whole, no longer emerging but fully present. The story that had begun with betrayal had developed into something else entirely, a self-portrait of transformation, captured not in shadow and light, but in truth and possibility.